We are so privileged to have with us Professor Praveen Sethupathy, who is director of the Center for Genomics at Cornell University, where he directs a research lab focused on genomic approaches to understanding human health and disease. I can't think of a scientific topic that's more relevant during these times. And given this, Praveen has recently turned his attention and his lab's attention to COVID-19 related work. Praveen has been an invited speaker for the Veritas Forum. He's served on the advisory board for the American Association for the Advancement of Science Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion, as well as the board of directors for the BioLogos Foundation. Praveen has the kind of keen intellect and humility that I think we need in these times in the science community. And I'm so privileged as well that he's here to speak with us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this next session of the conference. My name is Praveen Sathipathi. I'm a professor of biomedical sciences at Cornell University in beautiful Ithaca, New York. I'm also a devout Christian and have long been passionate about the interface of science and faith. I serve on the board of directors of the BioLogos Foundation, which is an organization that is committed to conveying the harmony between science and a reflective Christian faith. If there are any on the conference that don't know about BioLogos, I encourage you to check it out. It's biologos.org. There are many, many articles, information, resources, Q&A that you can sift through and learn. It's really an honor for me to be here today. Sincere thanks to Elaine and the Religion and Public Life program for inviting me, to the Templeton Religion Trust for their support, and the tireless workers, you've heard about Haley and many others behind the scenes who make events like this possible. And finally, of course, to all of you for attending. I really appreciate your time and interest. This year, 2020, marks 20 full years since I became a Christian. And what a ride it has been. Over those years, I've had profound moments of connection with God at the most unexpected times. And I've found inspiration in heroes of faith in the most unlikely places. And these experiences have already exceeded my wildest imaginations. But nothing in these past 20 years comes even remotely close to those first few weeks and months when I met Christ. During that time, even as the ugliness of my own sin was being exposed, the almost unearthly beauty and power of God was being revealed to me. And I learned not just that God is good, but also that God is wild. As C.S. Lewis might put it, he is not tame, nor can he be tamed. He doesn't fit neatly in my boxes. He never has. And this is why, when I do science, which after all is just an exploration of the world that God has authored, I expect to be surprised. And when I am, I see it as an invitation to worship. The task before me this evening, or this afternoon, I should say, is to speak on the common ground between science and faith, from my perspective as a Christian and as a scientist. I know every generation of scientists say the same thing, so it is a bit cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway because it is true. It is an extraordinarily exciting time to do science. We are just scratching at the surface of what there is to know and discover in the natural world. And it feels like we are right at the edge of a new frontier, especially in areas like genomics, neuroscience, and astronomy. But at the same time, we are also at a cultural crossroads in terms of the role of science and scientists in shaping our worldview. And the situation surrounding COVID-19 has made that even more clear. Some suggest that science is the sole arbiter of truth and that it is our only foundation for human value and purpose. Whereas others are suspicious and wary of science because they believe there is an agenda among scientists to marginalize faith, perhaps. It's worth pointing out If viewed through the lens of individuals throughout history, this culture war is a relatively recent one. Science and faith have actually long been very productive co-laborers in the pursuit of truth. One very prominent individual who exemplified this for me is Johannes Kepler. He's a famous German thinker and scientist from the 17th century. He established the laws of planetary motion and is considered one of the greatest astronomers and mathematicians. I've used this example before, and so if folks have heard it, I apologize. But in one of his most famous scientific treatises, Kepler starts with the following words: "I commence a sacred discourse, a most true hymn to God the Founder, and I judge it to be piety not to sacrifice many bulls to him, and to burn incense of innumerable perfumes, but first to learn myself, and afterwards to teach others too, how great he is in wisdom, how great in power, and of what sort in goodness." Kepler didn't fall into science and then just hope that science and faith could be partners in his pursuit of truth. Kepler was actually driven to science by an insatiable desire to learn about and celebrate what he believed to be a creative God. The scientific lens, whatever it happened to reveal, didn't push God out of Kepler's worldview. Instead, it gave him a window into just how amazing and just how wonderful and creative God is. To paraphrase the Belgic Confession of Faith, the universe is like a beautiful book, the study of which makes us ponder the invisible things of God. Today, I want to provide 3 concrete ways in which I have found that science and Christian faith need each other: curiosity, humanity, and joy. So to start with, curiosity. How does scientific curiosity inform or even encourage one's faith? To answer this question, let's consider the COVID-19 pandemic in which we are all currently embroiled. As we now know all too well, COVID-19 is caused by a novel virus called SARS coronavirus 2. And a common question I've heard, and that exists in the minds of many, from children to adults alike, is why would God create viruses? Embedded in this question, usually, is the assumption or the perception that viruses are bad, even evil. It's easy to understand this assumption because as a society, we really only talk about viruses when a pandemic like this hits. And especially in the midst of tragedy, when answers are desperately needed, it's easy to offer reflexive responses, like linking viruses to the fall of man, which have a biblical kind of sound and shape to them, but ultimately may not deepen our understanding of the world or of God's wisdom. Curiosity, on the other hand, is all about challenging assumptions. So what happens when we dig a little deeper? Well, what we learn is that human life, as we know it, would not exist without viruses. We would not exist without viruses. And to understand why, we have to first talk a little bit about bacteria. So come on with me for a little journey here. Right? Bacteria are different kinds of germs than viruses, and at least in soil, they represent the most abundant kind of microorganism. In fact, in just a teaspoon of productive soil, you can find more than 1 billion bacteria. That's almost the population of the entire continent of Africa. Some soil and ocean bacteria are actually photosynthetic, meaning they produce and release much of the oxygen that we breathe. We're used to thinking about plants and trees in this way, but most people don't realize that bacteria are actually responsible for the rise in oxygen levels in the Earth's atmosphere that eventually paved the way for oxygen-dependent life forms like us to inhabit the Earth. Even today, 10 to 20%, depending on who you talk to, of the oxygen that we breathe is produced by just one particular species of photosynthetic bacteria. So if you maybe put that in another way, 1 in every 5 breaths that you and I take, we owe entirely to bacteria. So as grateful as I am, there's a little bit of a problem. and that is that bacteria are very, very prolific multipliers. One particular strain you may know about, called E. coli, can actually double its population every 20 minutes under the right conditions. So if you were to start out with just 2 bacteria and you let them reproduce, within the span of one day, just 24 hours, there would be 10 to the 21 bacteria. That's a 1 with 21 zeros after it, right? A number that is difficult to fathom, and that is just after one day. So it is no exaggeration to say that if left to themselves, bacteria would take over the earth, leaving no room for us humans. So how is this dealt with? Well, here's where viruses come into the picture. It turns out the main job of viruses is to keep bacteria in check. There are 10 to the 30 or more viruses in the world, and the vast majority of these don't interact with humans at all. Most of them are focused on attacking bacteria. So bacteria develop new strategies to evade viruses, and then viruses have to mutate and change in order to keep pace with the bacteria. And round it goes. All the time, all around us, completely undetected by our naked eye, is a never-ending germ war. And we owe our lives to this germ war, because without it, we wouldn't have our very breath. The one problem is that every so often, very, very rarely, viruses can mutate in a way that enables them to infect humans and maybe even cause a pandemic. So here's our situation. We depend on viruses. We even need them to be adaptable and flexible so that they can keep up with bacteria in the germ war. But it is exactly this adaptability that creates the possibility of a pandemic in the human population. In other words, there is an inherent risk to life. But I think you will agree that it is worth it, because we get to know and be known, to love and be loved, and there is an unspeakable kind of beauty and wonder and joy in that reality. We started this section with the question, why did God create viruses? But the curiosity to dig deeper, a shared value of science and faith, has led us to realize something about God. He creates beautifully balanced ecological systems where all sorts of diverse life forms can exist, precisely because no one of them is given an ultimate upper hand over another. I like to think this is a part, maybe, of what God meant when he looked at all that he made and said, "This is very good." The second topic is humanity. What makes us human? Elaine alluded to this briefly in her opening remarks. There has been a long-standing impulse in the scientific community to answer this question with biology. That is, to identify biological features of modern humans that appear to be unique to us, thereby separating ourselves from other species. One such attempt has been at the cellular level, right? Can we define the human as a collection of human cells where each cell is defined by all of its contents? It feels like an elegant approach at first, but there's a problem. One of the most remarkable discoveries in human biology is that our bodies are home to tens of trillions of microorganisms, mostly bacteria. Tens of trillions. It's a staggering number. Because if you put it in another way, slightly more than half of the cells in the human body are not human at all. And these bacteria live alongside and communicate with our human cells in a variety of different organs, including the skin and the intestine. And it turns out that they're absolutely critical for the healthy functioning of those organs. We could not properly absorb nutrients or maintain energy balance in our body without the bacteria living inside of us. So these bacteria, they obliterate a traditional view that a human can be defined by human cells alone. Even by biology, we're clearly more than that. So what if we dig deeper? What if we defined a human by DNA, the genome? Believe it or not, here too we face a bit of a sticky problem. Littered throughout our genome are genetic elements that originate from other species that we tend to think are completely unlike us. In fact, at least 10% of our human genome represents sequences from viruses that have integrated into our DNA over time. So even at the genetic level, each of us is at least 1/10 virus. And amazingly, viral DNA may have actually shaped some aspects of human biology that we take for granted today. For example, there is growing evidence to suggest that pieces of viral DNA may contribute to the development of the human placenta. This is fascinating to me, right? That viruses may have helped bring about an organ that is critical for nourishing a growing baby in the human womb. PBS was so taken by this that several years ago now, they published a Nova Next article entitled "The Viruses That Made Us Human." To me, this doesn't take away from God's authorship of our lives. Instead, it adds a wonderfully surprising color to the truth of Psalm 139, that God knit us together in our mother's wombs. Who am I to say that God cannot use viruses to accomplish this? The bottom line is that it is not straightforward to define human uniqueness with very clear, immutable, discrete biological categories. There is even greater biological connectedness across different species than we might have previously appreciated. So how does this compare with what the Bible says about what it means to be human? To start with, I believe we should be very careful not to read the Bible as though it were a scientific text, and Professor Laberton alluded to this as well. But that said, it is rather striking that humans are sometimes described in exactly the same terms as other animals. In Genesis 1, humans and animals are both created on day 6. We don't even get a separate day. In Genesis 2, humans and other creatures are both referred to as nefesh chaya, which is often translated as a living soul or a living organism. So many Bible scholars have argued that even the idea of a soul is not uniquely human. Also in Genesis 2, humans are created from the dust of the ground, which is exactly the way the formation of other animals is also described. So when it comes to the stuff we're made of, whether we're talking about Genesis or genetics, it seems we cannot escape that there is a fundamental connectedness among all animals, including humans. The book of Ecclesiastes puts it rather poetically, just as the animals, from dust we came, and to dust we shall return. From a purely material standpoint, I think there's more agreement between science and Christian faith than most realize. So then, according to Genesis, is there anything that sets humans apart? During the telling of how the universe came to be, the phrase image of God is used for only one species, humans. The Hebrew word used for image in Genesis is the same word used to describe royal images that a king would set up all across his kingdom when he was not physically present. Bible scholar and theologian Dr. Richard Middleton defines the image of God in his book, The Liberating Image, which I would highly recommend to anybody interested, as the royal office of human beings as God's representatives and agents in the world. We are called to manifest and channel the character and presence of God, priestly service toward the rest of creation. My reading is that the image of God is not primarily a biological feature, but rather a vocational calling that is gifted to us. In other words, according to Genesis, it's not what we are made of, but rather what we are called to that fundamentally sets us apart from the rest of biological life. And this calling is placed equally upon every human life, no matter ancestry, color, disability, or economic status. That's a very important theological point, and it may be different in character from what we can learn from science, but it is still perfectly harmonious with the claims of science. So now this brings me to the third way in which science harmonizes with the Christian faith, and that is joy. I believe it is not only the calling to reflect God's character that makes us human. I think there's another piece to the puzzle, and it's not Genesis, but rather Psalm 104 that helps reveal it. Most of the verses about creation in Psalm 104 seem to emphasize the purpose that the created entities serve. The water is to quench the thirst of the wild donkeys. The grass is food for the cattle. The trees are homes for birds, and so on. But one day, when I was reading this psalm, one verse stood out as very different to me. Verse 26 says that the Leviathan was created simply so it could play in the water. That was remarkable. It reminds us that while part of God's wisdom in creation is indeed order and purpose, another part is simply for the fun and the pleasure of it. He takes delight in his Leviathan, which he formed apparently so that it could take delight in the oceans. I think this should color the way we read the entire psalm. Going back through the psalm, we can see the theme of joy woven throughout, the gushing forth of springs in verse 10, and the singing of the birds in verse 12, the wine that gladdens the human heart in verse 15. All these things make it clear that God makes things not just to satisfy needs like hunger and thirst, but also for pure enjoyment. And I think herein lies the core truth of the Christian faith, that at the heart of creation is God's joy. God has been taking immense pleasure in his creation from the very beginning, and mankind is that unique slice of creation that gets to delight in creation right alongside our Creator. We uniquely get to peer into and make known what Ephesians 3:10 calls the manifold wisdom of God, and thereby draw nearer to God's joy in the experience of creation. For me, at the end of the day, this is a lot of what the scientific enterprise is about. Science doesn't detract from my humanity, it encourages it. It persuades me every day to open my eyes to the overabundance, almost prodigal amount of created things all around us. The sheer vastness of the created order and the diversity and complexity of created things, it's just awe-inspiring if you take a moment to reflect on it. I believe we are meant to explore, to wonder, to be in awe, in a way that I believe no other animal is. As we get older, though, we far too easily assume an overly pragmatic or utilitarian view of the world. But actually, it's all there, at least in part, simply because God enjoys it. And as humans made in his image, we are called to discover it and enjoy it too. Taking a deep pleasure in creation strongly links my experience as a scientist and as a Christian. I want to end today with two quotes from two very different men. The first is from Henri Poincaré, a brilliant French mathematician and scientist of the 19th century who happened to be an atheist. He said, "The scientist does not study nature just because it is useful to do so. He, or she, I might add, studies it because he takes pleasure in it, and he takes pleasure in it because it is beautiful." The second quote was from Jonathan Edwards, the great American theologian of the 18th century. "All the beauty to be found throughout the whole creation is but the reflection of the diffused beams of that being who has an infinite fullness of brightness and glory." Thank you very much for attending and for listening today. I think this is the opportunity that we have to do some Q&A. And so I'll start reading, just as Professor Laberton did. I will start reading out some of the questions that have come in. And so I encourage you to send your questions. Mark Goodman from Albuquerque shares that he's moved by the testimony. Thank you very much, Mark. Question is, what experiences and perspectives do you bring from your previous faith journey that interact with your Christian understanding to support your curiosity and your awe of the natural world and the excitement and the joy that you feel in your research? Wow, that's a wonderful question. I have often found myself wishing that people ask that question, and I've never actually been asked. Um, I was raised in a Hindu household, and while I am a devout Christian now, I still really value the traditions that I grew up with, and the many ideas and thoughts and values that were passed down to me by my parents. One of the things that I have to confess sometimes I bristle at a little bit is the notion that it was really just Christianity that allowed science to flourish. I think that is no doubt true. Many of Kepler himself, they were driven, as I said, to science because of a belief in a creative God and in a God of order and principle. And he is all those things, and our faith teaches those things. And so it was very natural for him and many others to pursue science. And so I think it is important that we emphasize that and help people in modern day to understand that. But what gets missed in that, or perhaps what gets assumed in that conversation, is that there's something that only the Christian faith can bring to the table in terms of the advancement of science. And my own experience has demonstrated that that is not true, that there are quite a number of really incisive, profound, poignant Hindu thinkers and scholars and scientists who have made tremendous contributions to science over the many centuries. They're not as well discussed, not as widely known and appreciated and understood. But actually, there are points of connection between what motivates us Christians to pursue science and what motivates others in other faith traditions. And so, as we appreciate those more, and I hope we will, I think it actually provides greater opportunity for us to be able to relate and connect with and have productive discourse with people of other faith traditions. So we have another question here. Viruses can be a friend and a foe, as you've alluded to. I am in discussion with researchers who have developed a vaccine for HPV and unfortunately deal with patients who suffer with the results of HPV. The intersection of faith and science are displayed here in an interesting fashion because we are all dealing with science and potentially morality issues. There's a strong push in America to distrust vaccines in general. How does one communicate effectively in the Christian community the positives of vaccines in a society that values the choice to reject science despite its ability to alleviate suffering? Wow, brilliant question. One that I believe we could probably build an entire conference around in and of itself. And I don't say that lightly. It's just a really brilliant question and a very, very important one. I think if I could take a step back, more generically, how do we communicate and convey the truths and realities that science is revealing to a community or an audience or individual who is resistant, not only perhaps to that specific information, but to science as an authority in any realm or sphere? There are a couple of things I would like to say in response to this. The first is that sometimes we need to really develop a discernment for when those conversations are even worthwhile. And what I mean by that is, I think over time we can begin to determine, based on the posture of the individuals with whom we are speaking, or perhaps even our own heart in that moment, whether or not engaging in a discussion looks like it's going to be productive, that is going to be iron sharpening iron, or is actually going to be a war of words where people are speaking past each other and not to each other. And I think that as we develop discernment, there may be many opportunities where we find we actually step out of needing to say anything at all. That may not seem like the advice that you were expecting, but I think sometimes disengagement when we have a strong feeling that it may not be productive is important. Secondly, if we think or we believe or if we're led by the Spirit to engage in a conversation, I think the first thing we need to do is to not believe that that the communities that are resistant are monolithic in the reasons for their resistance. There are often many different kinds of histories, backgrounds, and reasons why people end up being resistant. And so the first step, in my view, is to actually stop and listen. Listen and learn in as much as is possible what is motivating the individuals who are resistant. What I have found in my sometimes feeble efforts to do that are that the reasons are quite diverse, more nuanced and complicated than I originally assumed or realized. And I often find not only is that directly beneficial for me, but it allows me to gain trust with individuals who see me as not someone who is just trying to convince them and move on to the next project, but as an individual who doesn't need to be condescended to, but needs to be listened to and heard because they have a view or an understanding, rightly or wrongly, that deserves to be validated and heard, even if not agreed with. A lot more I could say on that, and I apologize it's not a full answer to the question, but there are others coming in that I would love to be able to address here. We have a question from Louise Huang. Thank you for your presentation. In addition to curiosity, humanity, and joy, how else can Christians better approach contentious areas of science and the Christian faith, especially in some areas that are heavily politicized? Any practical advice there? I think this is also an extraordinarily good question, somewhat related to the previous question in that there's a connection in not making assumptions about what is really motivating the contentiousness or the disagreement. Right? So there are good reasons for why people have gained a distrust in science and scientists. Right? Elaine alluded to some of these, especially, for example, communities of color. Science and scientific enterprise has not always been an ally. And there are tragedies and horrors in the way that science has been abused to disenfranchise and discriminate against entire groups of people. And so, today we have a responsibility as scientists to stand up, to be vocal about that, to recognize those wrongs, and to do everything we can to have transparency and openness about how science is being done going forward. So I think before we start trying to just give people information, we need to know that there is distrust. And it is rarely ever eloquence or information that alleviates distrust. What we need to do is actually build relationships. And the reality of that is that that is a long game. It's not a short game. There isn't a program, not even a brilliant, fantastic conference like this that will immediately alleviate problems of distrust. It takes actually coming out of our comfort zones, meeting with those communities, getting to know them and helping them to understand who we are as well, and building genuine relationships. From that platform, I think we can begin to create connections to talk about scientific issues where there may be disagreement or distrust. We have another question. Do you think the de novo creation of Adam and Eve is ruled out by evolutionary science? And this is from Josh Swamidas at WashU St. Louis. Thank you so much, Josh, for the question and for attending the conference. Great to hear from you. No, I do not believe that it is. In fact, I think one of the more special things about being a part of the BioLogos community, as well as other people in my network who I have been able to challenge and they have been able to challenge me, is that I don't think any one model really that exists right now to try to understand Genesis is clearly and definitively more tenable in terms of consistency with Scripture, which we hold in high authority, than another. I mean, there may be some for which we can poke more holes than others, but I think there are several models. These have been put forth by folks like Dennis Alexander or Deb and Lauren Harzma and Josh Swamidas. There are many models out there, and I think it is important for all of these models to be clearly exposited and available for the community to wrestle with. And I don't think the goal ultimately is to then determine which of these models. I am not sure that on this side of heaven, the definitive model, or exactly how things came to pass, will be made known to us. But I think it is in the process of Christian brotherhood and sisterhood where we wrestle with one another, sharpen each other. I think we'll find that each of these models have some really interesting possibilities, but also maybe have some holes. That doesn't mean that they're wrong, but it means that we have to be continually challenged about our assumptions. And that's a part of curiosity, as we discussed. Okay, so we have another question here. Thank you very much. This is from Mike Kirby. What experiences have you had talking about faith and science in scientific circles? That's a really good question. I appreciate you asking that. Most of my public lecturing on science and faith is to college campuses or congregations or communities like I imagine the one on the conference right now that already have a predisposition and an interest in science and faith. I've not had extensive conversations, believe it or not, with my colleagues. When I was in training as a graduate student, I think probably bemusement is the best word to use. There was some kind of surprise and sort of looking at askance looks about why I would still hold to archaic beliefs like this. But to be honest, overwhelmingly, I have not found in my time at the University of Pennsylvania, at the University of North Carolina, at the National Institutes of Health, and at Cornell University, overwhelmingly, I have not found derision or any kind of genuine or serious persecution. I think this is at least in part because I make significant efforts to ensure that I'm very careful about how my work in this area is perceived. And I aim to pursue excellence for the craft that they have hired me. And I think that as I persist in doing that, they're less likely to have a problem with me and maybe beliefs or opinions that I hold. So I have not found it to be overwhelmingly challenging or difficult. And in fact, I have found that especially as I am open and honest about how my faith, my church community, or others whom I know that may be Christian are working toward justice for our Black brothers and sisters, or to improve the dialogue in the science-faith conversation that directly impacts their ability to do their work. I think there's actually a willingness to embrace the value of the kinds of things that I am doing. I'm not sure that many of them feel that is a cause for them to embrace the faith themselves, but I think it starts by them seeing value in people of faith in the arena. Okay, so I have a final question here. I think we might still have time for this. So in a pluralistic community like mine in India, how explicit could a scientist or scholar be in her interface between faith and the practice of sciences, especially in her classroom or in conversation with peers? Yeah, my general feeling on this is I don't think there's one right approach, and I think everybody should be thoughtful, prayerful, and lean on the advice of your community and the people who best understand your situation. But I will reflect very briefly on my own experience. Because of the distrust, because people often have many misconceptions about what it means to be a Christian or to care about the science-faith interface, I rarely ever lead with that kind of information. But I will tell you that if people genuinely get to know me, possibly in the 7th or the 8th or the 9th conversation, they will learn that I'm a Christian. They will learn about what that faith commitment means to me. It will come out. And it's in that moment where cognitive dissonance is created, right? Where they've gotten to know me, they appreciate me as whether it be a scientist or a mentor or a colleague. And so when they find out about my faith commitments, it's that there's a confusion that rests in, and then they come with the question themselves. I find that it is much more productive to engage when they come with the question, because they are invested in hearing the answer. Otherwise, it's too easy to dismiss someone according to your misconceptions. But if you are stepping in order to try to challenge those misconceptions out of curiosity, then it becomes a much more productive conversation. And so I generally wait for those kinds of moments rather than trying to be overly project-oriented or aggressive in the way that I talk about my faith. Okay, I think we've closed the Q&A for now. Thank you very much again for inviting me, and I will pass the baton back to the organizers.